Hello, and welcome to the course. I'm your host, Stephen, and today I'm speaking with Professor Carolina López-Ruiz of the Divinity School and the Department of Classics. Professor López-Ruiz holds a PhD from the University of Chicago Committee on the Ancient Mediterranean World, and is the author and editor of multiple books, the most recent of which is Phenicians and the Making of the Mediterranean, which won the 2023 American Schools of Overseas Research Frank Moore Cross Book Award, as well as that year's Mediterranean Seminar Book Prize. She's here today to talk to us about how studying the Phoenicians sheds new light on the ancient world, what it actually takes to study their culture, and how she became a University of Chicago professor. Professor López-Ruiz, welcome to the course. It's lovely to have you. How are you this morning?
Thank you very much, Stephen. I'm very happy to be here. I am in Greece, looking at the Mediterranean Sea in a very hot day. I'm very happy to be talking to you.
Sorry to tear you away from that view, but thank you so much for making the time. Could you please tell us just quickly and of course, in layman's terms, what your position is at UChicago and what that really means?
Right. So I am a professor. I think my official title is of Ancient Mediterranean Religions and Mythologies in the Divinity School and the Department of Classics. I am basically, between the two units, Divinity School and Classics.
Tell me about your early interests and what you thought you wanted to do with your life when you were a kid.
Right, small question.
Yeah.
But I guess that's what the course is about. So let's say I was one of those kids who kind of knew or thought they knew what they wanted to do when they were little, and I actually did it. So I know it doesn't have to be that way at all, and it often doesn't happen that way. But I don't know, since I can remember, and I was reading, even comic books about that involved ancient world or mythology or romance or Asterix, all these sorts of things. I just got very immersed in the ancient world and loved history, even in those kind of quirky ways. And I loved going to archaeological sites and museums, all of that. So anyway, I had an idea when I was a teenager, let's say when you really start thinking a little bit more about it, my idea was to be an archaeologist. I didn't have a very good idea what that would entail really, but Indiana Jones and all that in a very fantastic way, but just exploring the world and I loved antiquities. But as I went into high school and so on, I realized I really love ancient languages. So I was doing Latin in high school and then a little bit of Greek, ancient Greek as well. And I really liked it. I was good at it. And so my dilemma going into college was whether to do the languages, like to go into philology, let's say classics, more strictly speaking, or doing history, like ancient history / or archaeology, right? Because there are different ways. I grew up in Spain. The system is very different than in the US, right? You basically in high school, you have to choose a sort of a humanities track or a science track in a much more strict way than in the US. You have some electives or some, advanced courses or whatever. No, you really have to choose. And that determines what kinds of degrees you can get into in university. And then once you go into the university, it's like going into graduate school almost, in terms that you go directly into law or into medicine or into archaeology or philology or whatever, right? So it's different. I think in a lot of Europe, it is that way. So that explains why I went from high school to classical philology. That's how the degree was called. So it was 5 years then of Greek and Latin and linguistics and all of that. So I decided on the languages after, discussing with my teachers and my parents, especially my father and my parents, which way to go. And people seem to think, I think correctly, that the languages require more systematic instruction, or you might benefit more of that kind of instruction by levels than, say, history, where, I guess you can always gear towards history later or read on your own or whatever. So anyway, I went into the languages mainly. And I was in Madrid, in the Autónoma University of Madrid. And then my obvious choice was to keep going, keep studying, go to graduate school, whatever I could do. And I spent 1 year in Israel at the Hebrew University doing whatever I wanted. It was one of these exchange years with a fellowship, and I could choose what I do. So there I took some archaeology courses. I took some Hebrew, some Arabic, and explored. At the same time, I had already started studying modern Hebrew during college and Arabic, just because I wasn't satisfied with Greek and Latin. I wanted to learn ideally all the languages of the Mediterranean if I could.
It sounds like you're getting close, yeah.
Right. And of course, you cannot do it in a lot of depth for all of them. And the Arabic, unfortunately, got a little bit hanging behind. But I wasn't sure what to do with all of that. What I knew was that this will be relevant for when I talk about my research later. What I knew is that I was intrigued by the Mediterranean as a place of cultural encounters. I'm not sure I had the vocabulary to even say that back then. It was just, I just thought of how I was fascinated by the idea that the Greeks would have encountered people who were speaking Hebrew or Aramaic or Akkadian or whatever, and not the idea of the classical Greek world as kind of bound, in itself. So I wasn't sure what to do with that. I just wanted to learn more languages, and then I participated in excavations in Israel for 2 summers. That kind of put me in a better position to apply for graduate school in the United States. So I got a scholarship that allowed me to go to, any program I wanted. And that's where I found, among other options, but the best one, I found the program in Chicago, actually, the University of Chicago. This graduate program called, it was called the Committee on the Ancient Mediterranean World. And it was kind of based on classics, the classics program, but for people who wanted to do classics and something else. So classics and the Near East was the most typical thing, people doing Greek culture and Egyptian culture and the interactions among them, or Greek and Mesopotamian, or in my case, what I was going for was Greek and kind of Semitic cultures, especially what we call Northwest Semitic, that is Hebrew, Canaanite, Aramaic, Phenicians, kind of the Levant. So I did this program at the University of Chicago, and it was perfect. It was exactly what I wanted, and there is where I found the ways to channel these various interests into a course of study that was precisely about this, like about how the ancient Greek world was shaped by its connections and exchange with the Near Eastern world, right?
It sounds like you were really really trying to learn every language that you possibly could. Where do you think that impulse comes from, or that interest?
It's hard to say, when you start doing something, there are people who start doing physics and mathematics and they love it, and and it's beyond my comprehension. Every one of these systems, right, are the same with mathematics, are their own universe, their own language, right, in a way. So for me, ancient languages, for that matter, modern languages, are really the gateway into the culture, right? Like there is nothing like learning even a little bit of a language to start getting a sense, a glimpse of that culture. So for the ancient languages, it's the same. Besides, I have fun reading and translating. I love translating. I love analyzing, looking at linguistic problems and all that. But especially it was this sense that, I don't know, that if you're going to work on trying to understand a culture in antiquity or several cultures and how they interact and how they borrow from each other and whatnot, you need to engage directly with the texts that you have. And for that, you really need the training, right, to be able to read those texts. And so it's basically that. And then as you do it, also you're engaging with the whole tradition of philology, right? For Greek and Latin, there is so much, also for Hebrew and for other languages. That another aspect I like is that sense of kind of continuing in a line of studying and keeping knowledge alive of these centuries-long traditions, right? And that we are part of a kind of a chain of not losing it and studying them as so many people have done before us. And there is something kind of interesting about that for me, or rewarding about that.
I'm curious if you have any any advice or words of wisdom you might pass to someone who has that type of interest but is a little bit intimidated about taking that many language classes? Because I mean, in my experience, learning a language at university can be like pretty intense, and obviously, it's
Yeah.
a lot of work goes into any
Yeah.
language learning, right? So, like, what would you say to people who are maybe hesitant?
Yeah. Well, I would say if you really like it, do it. I mean, if you have the opportunity and you really enjoy it, and it comes relatively easy. I mean, it's never easy. So when easy, I mean that you're not struggling, like it's something that is like horribly difficult for you, but something that you can see that it pays off, right? The effort you put in pays off and you enjoy it, then do it as much as you can. It doesn't need to be that you become a classicist or a Latinist, but if you have the chance to learn, it's something that you have for life. You can read your text if you want, or you can just learn other languages later. Or so I don't know. I am of the opinion that university is to expand your worldview and your knowledge in as many ways as you want to, and as you can. Then we are all forced to choose, make choices of what are you going to do now so that you can get a job in that. But there is a lot of flexibility built into the American system. Again, in contrast to the European system, they each have their advantages. In a sense, you can get more specialized quicker in Europe. But on the other hand, I love that flexibility of the American college where you can explore. We didn't have that, and I wouldn't have minded being able to do a bit more than classical philology. So I think take advantage of that. If you can do a major in, I don't know, nuclear engineering and do a minor in classics, right? Or in Near Eastern languages, or in Hebrew Bible, or in Arabic. It's very doable. A lot of people do that, and that's satisfying enough. It's not a lot of coursework to do a minor. A lot of people do double majors too, just for the sake of it, even if they're going to be, whatever, lawyers or. And then you may actually end up going into graduate school and doing what, the humanities thing. There's no harm in adding that knowledge. Go for it.
Well, and I was also curious about your decision to go to grad school in the U.S. I mean, was there a particular reason you felt that you should be pursuing this on a different continent, or like what was the thought process there?
Right. That's a good question. I could have done something like similar perhaps in Europe, but maybe not, because again, because of the different system, because you specialized in Europe, you specialized in the first degree, right? In the BA, let's say. Then the PhD, if anybody's familiar with the British system, for instance, they go straight into dissertation. Like they go from a BA to a PhD, and in 2 years, or they're done. They write a thesis, and that's it. I didn't want that. I wanted to keep studying, as per what I was saying before of adding language training and all that. I wanted a program where I could learn more of these languages. So I studied Hebrew Bible, and I studied Ugaritic and Phoenician. Anyway, these other Semitic languages that are related. I couldn't have done that as easily somewhere else. So I knew that the American system and American higher education is really, it's really probably, among the best in the world, and that it offered this, again, this flexibility. And I wanted to keep going deeper in this direction. And biographically, there is a little autobiographical note there, because my parents studied in the US. I mean, they're Spanish and Colombian, but my father did a PhD in North Carolina, and I was actually born there. So I'm an American citizen by birth, but then they moved back to Spain, where he was a professor. But I have to admit that I had this family history of studying in the US, for graduate school. So it wasn't destiny. It wasn't something I had to do, but I think I wanted to follow also in those footsteps.
Who are a few people who were crucial to your academic journey, be they professors you had, or just people around you?
Yeah, well, as becoming a recurring theme, but my father, I would say, was very crucial in promoting or fostering this interest that I had in history and the ancient world. Like he would take me on field trips, and he took me to Rome when I was 11. He took me to Jerusalem when I was 15, and so we would travel some and buy me books and all that. So I mean, he saw what I liked, and instead of discouraging me, which many parents may do, like, oh, that's what are you gonna do with that? You need to study sciences or whatever. He encouraged it and gave me confidence that this was something I could do. I never saw an impediment, and so he was tremendously inspiring. And he still reads the things I write and publish, and we talk about everything. So he's really been a companion in this journey. And then, of course, different professors, even from my high school Latin teacher, who was a wonderful woman, very serious and stern, as a typical Latin, a stereotypical Latin.
Yes,
teacher.
The classic. Yeah.
She was like, no, she was not kidding, but really fair and a very good person. And anyway, and a good example. And then I don't know. It would be too hard to, point fingers at so many colleagues and even students, and that you interact with through the years. But in terms of early years, I would say my dad.
Yeah. That's funny that that stereotype of Latin teachers also exists on the other side of the Atlantic.
Right? Exactly.
Definitely been my experience.
Yeah. And well, if I can add, in terms of high school, in fact, other high school teachers, and for people out there who are still in those stages, my philosophy teacher, my art history teacher, I had conversations with them that I know were very important when I was trying to make this decision. Do I do philology? Do I do archaeology or history? And the encouragement, I remember one of them saying, just do both. Like it's not that hard. You can do it. You're a very good student. And of course, I didn't do both. I mean, both careers at the same time. But I did do a lot of things and studied other languages. And they give you sometimes just somebody just giving you the confidence to demythologize, let's say, a university ahead of you and think, if regular people can do this, I can do it. I'm a good student. So anyway, in Greece.
Well, I wanted to ask, we oftentimes will ask people like how their experiences abroad have impacted them. It sounds like your research has taken you around the Mediterranean quite a bit. But I wanted to ask specifically, I believe your most recent book won an award from the American Schools of Overseas Research, if I have that right.
Yes.
So
yes, correct.
Could you tell us a little bit about that project, like what it entailed?
So this book, it actually won 3 awards, but that's the kind of the most important one. I didn't think I was ever going to write a book that would win awards. You never know how that goes. But it is kind of the culmination of a lot of years of research on the Phenicians, who are these people from what is today the coast of Lebanon and a bit of northern Israel. So Tyre, Byblos, Sidon, those cities. So the Phoenicians are known as, sailors in the ancient Mediterranean. They set up colonies and settlements and harbors like all over the place in the Mediterranean. We're talking about the late 9th, 8th, 7th centuries BCE, right? So we're talking about what we call the Iron Age in Mediterranean parlance and in archaeological parlance. So the Iron Age, we're talking about the early Mediterranean history before the classical era of, Pericles and the Parthenon and the Persian Wars and all that. A couple of centuries earlier. So as I was saying, my research is driven by this interest in kind of finding these points of intersection between the Greek world and kind of the classical, what we call the classical world, and these other cultures. And the Phoenicians were really everywhere in the Mediterranean, and they interacted a lot with the Greeks. For instance, the Greeks write in an alphabet that they adapted from the Phoenician alphabet. And through that is that the Romans also, the Etruscans and the Romans also adapted their alphabet. So basically we use what was a Phoenician alphabet originally. We owe it to them. But the Greeks write a lot about the Phoenicians. They interacted in many ways. So basically, this is a book where I put together, the research I've been doing in how the Phoenicians interact with different people, not only the Greeks, but even in Spain, where I'm from. So they settled there in all of the southern coast, even the coast of Portugal. There are Phoenician settlements from the late 9th century on. So they interact with, say, Iberian groups. There are many different groups, but people from that area. They interact with peoples in North Africa, where they also settle, like at Carthage and other places. They interact with the Sicilians, with the Italians, with the Etruscans, and of course with the Greeks, with the Israelites too, and so on. So my book, basically, I follow this trail of kind of the Phoenicians everywhere trail, and what are they doing in every place? Who are the people who are there? What is their culture like? And show that, there are these very interesting interactions and cultural influences, kind of in both directions sometimes, or adaptations of Phoenician culture in the local culture, and how this happens in all these areas, including Greece, creating a sort of network of a very kind of interconnected culture, a new urban alphabetized culture that a lot of these groups shared. And this happened because of the Phoenician kind of trail, right? And the common ground of interaction with these Phoenicians. So that's the kind of the main argument. So I call the book The Phoenicians and the Making of the Mediterranean, meaning that was the first time that the ancient Mediterranean world was connected in this way, not only by trade and economic activity, but also by some cultural trends and technological adaptations and so on that were shared all across. Then this happens before, let's say, the Mediterranean gets more split between the expansion of Rome in the west and the Hellenistic Empire in the east and so on. And that's kind of a different story. But in these earlier centuries, there is really this almost global trending network of at least elite cultures and so on. So that is kind of what the book is about in a nutshell. That has kind of culminated a lot of the work I've been doing, through the years. So I am glad it got some rewards, some awards.
Yeah, congratulations.
Thank you.
What I'm curious, and I guess we shouldn't linger on this for too much longer, but I'm really curious what were your sources? Like, are we talking about Phoenician sources, or is this
That's an excellent
something that you're pulling from a bunch of different cultures?
Because there are a lot of challenges in the study of the Phoenicians, and one of them is precisely the sources. Why? Well, because we don't have the kind of corpus or body of texts that we have for the Greeks and the Romans, right? Or for the Hebrew, for the Israelites, for that matter, in the Hebrew Bible. So we don't have that manuscript tradition that has brought from the past this whole body of, of knowledge, of history. We don't have that. For the Phoenicians, or for that matter, from anybody else in the Mediterranean at that period. So it just doesn't happen. That's the exception. So what we have on the Phoenician side is archaeological record. A lot of sites, there is really a huge amount of archaeological discovery of this period of Phoenician culture, pottery, settlements, sanctuaries, art, you name it. And then inscriptions. So we have about 10,000 Phoenician inscriptions. Most of them, 90% of them, are very small and formulaic and funerary or whatever, and they don't give you narratives, right? And then there are some that are longer, that are like royal and give you some kind of narrative. But in any case, they give you, interesting data. So we have inscriptions, we have archaeology, and then we have the Greek sources and the Roman sources that speak about the Phoenicians, which of course are not exactly unbiased or, impartial sources, and they tell us whatever they choose to tell us, and they don't tell us what we want to know necessarily. But that's what we have, and they are very, very useful, and but very well external, obviously mediated, and limited to certain periods and certain events, right? Like the Punic Wars or the Persian Wars or things like that. So it's a variety of things: written sources, archaeological sources, art, everything you can get your hands on.
What is something that you are hoping to do like down the road? I'm curious if you have any projects in mind or just like areas in mind that you're hoping to turn to in the future.
I think I will just keep digging figuratively at, Phoenician materials, and I've been trying to just focus on some specific things like, artistic motifs or mythological motifs or some particular source. I'm just trying to go deeper into some aspects to just bring light on some aspects of their culture. But also I have an archaeological dig, so that keeps me pretty busy. This is going to be the third summer. We have a dig with the University of Chicago and the University of Malaga in Spain, and it's a Phoenician site, and we've been digging it for 3 years. It's going to be now, and that requires a lot of work also later to publish it and study the materials and all that. But what I want to keep trying to find out is who are these Phoenicians who are in Spain, for instance, right? Like, what are they doing there exactly? Why did they get there? How do they interact with the locals? That kind of thing. There is a lot of unanswered questions. So I think my projects will be, a bit more tied to the archaeology, perhaps. We'll see.
Figurative and literal digging.
Exactly. Yes, totally.
Well, thank you. We like big questions here, so
right.
I'm gonna ask a pretty broad one just to wrap up. What would you say you find most fulfilling about what you do?
Oh, talk about big questions.
Yeah, I can't get much bigger than that, right?
In a broad sense, I just find very fulfilling the fact that I can do what I am passionate about, what I like, and that I am paid for it, and and I can transmit it, and I feel it's just such a privilege. So that that is a great satisfaction. That not everybody has the opportunity to do that. I feel very privileged. So that is very satisfying. But being more granular, I guess, when there are those aha moments, it's really fulfilling when you have like an idea that some things come together, and you're like, bingo, I found the linchpin to this argument, or I found a new piece of evidence, or you have just a funny idea that you're like, oh, would that work? And then you start working on it. It's just very fun to have those moments every now and then. So yeah, there are too many things. Traveling and interacting with new colleagues, new students, just the social aspect of the academic profession is very fulfilling to me.
Thank you, Professor López-Ruiz, for your time today. And course takers, if you enjoyed today's interview, please check out the other ones. Leave us a comment, subscribe, follow, and share this episode with your friends and family. You can find out more about the University of Chicago through uchicago.edu or the university's campus in Hong Kong through uchicago.hk. Stay tuned for more, and thanks for listening.